yourself, then you have come to the right place. A veil has been put over the eyes of humanity. Evil people in high places have been hiding the truth in plain sight and building a false reality on lies and deception for far too long. And now, their time is coming to an end. It's time to fight back, to wake up, and to begin an uprising. Now is a time for judgment.
We also have some sad news from Hollywood. The family of actress Anne Heche says she is now legally dead, her body being kept on life support for possible organ donation. Heche has been in a coma for more than a week after she crashed her car into a home in Los Angeles last Friday. Her spokesperson said the actress suffered a severe injury caused by a lack of oxygen to her brain. Police say she had drugs in her system at the time of the crash. Anne Heche was 53 years old.
This is a time for judgment. Welcome to today's show. I don't normally do videos upon request, but a lot of people have on the website especially have mentioned this thing with Anne Heche, and I've noticed a lot of people have asked me to do a video on it here on YouTube, and I guess it's just another way to hopefully help wake people up so they realize that sacrifice, which is a word that we use in our day-to-day life because it's been implanted into our brains, that like we hear celebrities every day, right? Oh, the sacrifice I made. Oh, it's about sacrifice. Well, it's literally about sacrifice, and that's how magic works. They're telling you that everything's about sacrifice. But we think in our heads, we're like, oh, sacrifice means, I'm getting up an hour early and going into work or going into the gym. When these people literally get where they are and they tell you it's because of sacrifice, but it's really because of human sacrifice. Now, Anne Heche is an actress, if you're not familiar with her. Not that famous, but most known for dating Ellen DeGeneres, has been in some movies like Wag the Dog. And when you see these things occur, obviously you can immediately go, well, you can say everybody's a sacrifice, but you have to look for the obvious signs. And there's tons of obvious signs, including coming out of a body bag and sitting up as you're getting wheeled into a fire truck or an ambulance, which I'll show you. I mean, some of the stuff with this is so in our faces and so obvious that it's laughable how sloppy. I mean, this just reminds me of some of the false flags we see our government create all around the country all the time. And people go, well, what do? Why do they sacrifice these actors and actresses? Because part of the deal that they make is that when the time comes, and I'll show you this clip here, the time comes, you have to make sacrifices. People are sacrifices for one another. Certain celebrities sacrifice other certain celebrities. That's how this whole thing works. So this is a clip from a movie that I always use. The movie's called The Believers. This is what it's about.
I figured.
Of course, you're uncertain, Cal. Naturally, so was I, till I met him. Imagine, if you can, a life without uncertainty, freedom from doubt, the ability to choose, single-mindedness. One life from each of us, Cal, is all he asks, and he rewards our devotion 1,000-fold. Personal desires. Oh, yes, of course, anything. That's part of it. It's only the beginning. There was a time, Cal, when man was at one with the gods before the fall. Now we're at one again. And there have been addictions to power. It's a power you can't imagine. Power to create a world of our choosing. Power to destroy those who oppose us. I want you to join us.
Create this ground with this father's humble offering. Seek the strength
Two minutes, actually.
of our benefactors.
I'm gonna shoot
We
myself.
call upon the ancient gods to renew our strength.
What?
That's not good.
Guide your hand to strike down the
This
enemies of
makes
our
me
faith
want
and
to
of this
see
great
something.
nation.
I
We welcome
choose not to
our
let it
brother
bother you. I
Cal,
don't know what to tell you.
reborn to your grace.
But I'm leaving.
You know, if someone hears you say that, you probably end up somewhere. I don't think you want to be held against your will.
I don't have one here.
Just let me know.
I don't
Listening to
know
all
this
this
anymore.
awful music and stuff nowadays, I can't imagine why everyone's messed up in the head. Everything's about killing each other and this and that and wanting to die. I wonder if there's a correlation there.
I already listened to this music, and that's it.
Same thing. You still get the same ideas in there. a good night. This is what I'm talking about. This is the Believers scene. Basically, they're getting rid of a child.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the stuff with Anne Heche here. Now, interestingly enough, if you look into the history of her, you have common themes that we always see with Satanists and the occult. Anne Heche, abused as a child by her father. Usually when this happens, and I'm not saying 100% of the time, but I would say 90% of the time, the parents are usually in covens or cults, and they push this abuse onto children, and then it's a vicious cycle that never ends. That's how they've taken over so much, is that so many of these people in Hollywood have been abused as children, and then they become the abusers. Some people feel sorry for them because they're like, well, they were abused, but at the same time, it's like, well, they could stop the vicious cycle and come out and, expose what this really is, but they don't most of the time, and sometimes when they try to, they have malfunction. So Anne Heche was abused by her father as a child. We don't know if it's definitely satanic ritual abuse, but it reeks of it because she became a famous actress. Okay? All these people in Hollywood we obviously know are involved in the occult. Another thing that's very bizarre about this is that she died via, supposedly, of course, crashing her car, which I'll show you now, which is probably one of the most ridiculous clips you're ever going to see. I mean, really, this is like WWE type of stuff. Her brother died at a young age via the same death. He crashed a car into a tree and died when the family was living in New Jersey. So very similar, and remember how the occult operates. These rituals always seem to have significant meaning behind them. But here is Anne Heche. Okay, let's start with this. Her book cover for her book that she wrote, you can see her doing all-seeing eyes symbolism right on the cover. Don't call me crazy, or call me crazy, excuse me. Or she's holding the hand over the eye, blatant all-seeing eyes symbolism. They always do the all-seeing eyes symbolism. You can pretty much every single celebrity, you'll find them on a magazine cover, a book cover, doing this. Now, this isn't like, people are like, well, put their hand over their eye. Well, no one's catching her, getting a mosquito or a fly out of her eye. This is her book cover. So clearly, they take these photographs, they specifically want these pictures on magazine covers and on book covers, etc., etc. You can catch a guy doing something and it wouldn't be on purpose. Like I always say, if you watch baseball, if there's 2 outs, a lot of the guys hold up the devil horn, but they're not holding up the devil horns, they're holding up the number 2 to say there's 2 outs. So that's a little bit different. But when you're strategically placing it on covers like this, and she shows it all over her Instagram account, where she's doing all-seeing eye symbolism, which tells you she's one of them. And then if you look into the stuff she pushes and believes, like all the Hollywood loons, you obviously know that she's a witch, just like the rest of them. Now, let's look into, as we see, of course, her too with the black and white Masonic checkerboard. I wouldn't be surprised if she's Job's daughter, Rainbow Girl, and then initiated into Eastern Star Masonry. She was starring in a film coming out, of course, about human trafficking, so there's another connection there. Now, this wasn't about satanic ritual abuse, so I would say this is her doing her part, because, of course, these people will never expose Satanism. They pretend that human trafficking is happening from like people like me and you. Next door neighbor wants to make a couple $1,000, so he kidnaps somebody and sells them. That's not how trafficking really works. The occult literally birth people. In these covens, they birth children and use them specifically for trafficking. It's the biggest business in the world, bigger than drug trade, because they sell, children to one another, to other, people who are in these secret societies for exorbitant amounts of money you couldn't even fathom. And I've talked about over the years that they launder and use art shows and art galleries as fronts, places where you could put any price possible on an object. That way you can get away with, doing this stuff, and that's what they've set, this whole world has been set up to be for them. That's how they're getting away with all this, or have gotten away with it, but they won't be getting away with it for much longer. So here's the clip, okay, of Anne Heche. She drives her car into a tree. This is the actual news clip. And you can see her on a gurney, literally come out of a body bag. They're telling us that she's brain dead, but she sits up, almost as if they threw her in the body bag. And you might say about the car crash, like this erratic driving. Okay, well, this erratic driving can clearly be controlled because they have the ability to take control of cars. These smart cars, a lot of the cars, most of the cars, unless they're like, depending on what year what year the car is from, any cars that are current, they have the ability to hijack with the technology that they have. They can literally chime in, just zap themselves into the computer base of that car and do what they want. So this erratic driving, which makes no sense, and somebody who, of course, she was buying a wig or something like that beforehand, I'll show you that interview clip as well. So let's take a look at her sitting up on the gurney and notice the ambulance or the fire truck with the number 36